Okay. Good evening and welcome to today's work session. Today is Monday, December the 12th, 2022. The time is now p.m. The work session followed by a special meeting will now come to order. Start with the work session. We have some items. Item 1 is a demonstration of the new website. Item 2 is water and wastewater rate study. Item 3 is a committed funds discussion. And item 4 is the third quarter of marijuana funds. So let's go ahead and get started with item 1, demonstration of our new website. Who is presenting?
Mr. Mayor, I'll do a little introduction, but so excited to announce that I think the 19th, right, is our target date or our date for deploying the new website.
This 19th?
Yeah, this month.
This month.
And so Desiree Sandoval here and Kim Palin have worked really, really hard.
Okay.
And so I want to give them just a mad shout out. They've done a great job, and I think you'll be really impressed with what you see. But I wanted them to give you kind of the sneak peek preview of it before it goes live to the public. So with that, I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so Mayor, City Council. So in front of you right now, you'll see our current website. Since May, I've been working with the company Revise to help them design the new website. They completed the migration of our content from our old website to the new website at the end of October. And 3 weeks ago, Kim and I finished our training. And since then, we've been working to get all the content where we want it. We've been meeting with department heads to try to get their pages the way they want it. So without further ado, let's look at our new website.
Before we move on, could you please turn off your cell phones if you have them on, please? That we don't get interrupted. Appreciate it. Thank you. Go ahead, Kim.
This is our new website. I'll let Kim kind of go through and show you. So this is all what's on the home page for the citizen to look at. As you can see, the side bars there where it says Services, News, Calendar, and Explore. If you just want to say Visit Trinidad and you just want to go and see what we have, you can click on Explore and it's going to take you all the way to the bottom. You can look at the Visit Trinidad side. If it goes to there.
Excuse me, Des?
Yeah.
It's Other.
Hi.
Is the screen shared? Because I'm just seeing you, I'm not seeing the website.
Oh, you don't want to see just me. Let's see. It should be.
There you go, Kim.
Oh.
There we go.
Can you see it now, Audra?
Just about. Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Sorry about that. Okay, so if you click on any one of these tabs on the bottom, we've geared it towards tourism. Show them the parks and rec.
So yeah, you look under where it says services there, it's very intuitive on how to get to everything.
Yeah.
And
It's not cooperating with me.
those touchscreens are finicky.
And that was one of the
And
big
they just don't
questions.
like me at all.
Yeah.
At all.
So the Mondo pad's a little touchy.
Very touchy.
But Kim developed this page and it's pretty awesome. Show them the insights.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
So each park will be highlighted, it'll tell you a little bit about it, and it's separated on the top there by lakes, parks, and trails. So you have your option, it'll show you a map of where it is, some photos, way different from our current website. We have it to where, let's see, we've been working with fire department, gas department. Kim developed the fire department page and made it the way that Chief wanted it. It's up on mine, but there we go. So you're able to add pictures on the inside of each page. We can make the page basically any way that they want. As long as it's ADA compliant, we can do it.
Yep.
So Kim has some quick links.
And something like this, like the fire department, you know, whenever we add new services or new equipment and stuff, can you add that in there? That way to show the public
Yep.
that we're updating.
Mhm.
Good.
I'll show you the gas department.
Who's the admin for the page?
So Kim and I are the content editors. So anything
doesn't like me.
would pretty much go through us.
There we go.
This is why she made me do this, because she didn't want to do this. She knew it was finicky.
So I worked with Steve Crow to develop his page. He wanted his logo over there on the left-hand side. Tells you everything that you need to know about what to do if you smell gas. It has all his contact information on the right. So where you see the red, if you're on a cell phone and you go to our page, you can click on that and it'll dial it for you. So you can call right away.
Wow.
It has all his documents, forms, 811. If you go back to the home page, you can see we have all of our main popular services there in the middle. If you want a building permit, which is something that's been on an influx lately, Kim and Audra can tell you that. They can just click there and it'll take them to the building permit site. They can make a payment, they can find a job, they could ask for notifications like of an agenda. They could click there and each time I put in a new agenda, they'll get a notification. RFPs are over there. They can also report a concern. They can submit their question to any department that they want. There'll be an email, it'll send it to that department head and they can answer their question. The news, any new news, feel free to contact either I or Kim and we can go in and put any news article, anything. So right now we're gearing it toward the holidays. Our calendar has our upcoming events. So as you can see, today's City Council work session and it's going to show City Hall. We have photos of Santa, visiting Santa. There's a lot of Christmas geared items there. Oh, okay. So if you click on City Council, it's not only going to tell you where it is, but you can click on the agenda and it's going to give you where the agenda is. So anytime they want an agenda, they can come here and it'll be connected with the calendar. But something that Tom Murphy has asked me to do is put his video. So the last regular meeting, you just click there. And then
Good evening and welcome to tonight's City Council meeting. Today is
so you can have all the videos now. Yes. And also on the top there, we have, or if you go back to home, Kim, if you see in the corner, any alerts are going to be right here. So if there's a road closure or anything like that. Somebody wants to go to our social media page, they can click here on Facebook and it's going to take them to our Facebook page. Tell you what's going on in the city. Right now, it's the trolley tours. And then again, there's a YouTube button here. If they click it, it's going to go to Tom Murphy's YouTube page. Any questions?
Des, can you talk a little bit about the accessibility features that the website has?
Oh, sure. So anytime we create a page, which we can't really do it in this because this isn't our admin side, but when we create a page, we go in there and we type out whatever it is that we want to say, and there's a little accessibility guide, and we click it and it tells us whether that page is without any kind of issues, ADA-wise. If there are any issues, it'll tell us how we can fix them. So it gives us that option to fix them so that it's always accessible.
And what's the little guy in the corner?
And I believe that,
So that's also ADA. So users can adjust the contrast, the text size, so it's user friendly as well to adapt to what they need.
good.
any questions?
I have a question. on the top of that homepage, it says make a payment.
Uh-huh.
Is that, can people pay their utility bills?
Yes, yes, yes. So if you click on it, you can pay either a utility bill or a fine for court.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Can, like for instance, the building department,
Mhm.
let's say they go through the process, can they also pay, the services?
So for a building permit, they're not set up to where they can pay automatically online, as far as I know. They can complete a credit card authorization form that's on that, where they can just put in their credit card and it'll email it to whoever the administrator is
Okay.
and pay it that way. I don't know that they've talked about where they can do it online. I've done it with court because there was an opportunity that was presented to us and it was free, so we said, why not? I've only had like 2 payments though, so. Is there anything else? Any other questions? No?
Well done, ladies.
Excellent job.
So I will let James come up because since we're planning on going live, it may affect a few things internally.
External.
Well, I'm not the IT person.
It's out Okay, so currently our site's hosted with EvoGov and our go live date is December 19th.
Yes.
So when EvoGov, we give them the notification that they can shut down their services and Revise will take over. There's going to be a delay, could be up to 48 hours from when the old site goes down until the new site comes up. So that could also impact email. So if you're having trouble sending city email over that time period, it's going to be during that switch over.
December 19th and...
I think it's a Friday,
No, it looks
Thursday.
The
Oh, wait, I'm in
19th
the
is
wrong
next
one.
Monday.
Next
Next
Monday.
Monday.
So potentially we could experience some outages up through 20th, 21st. So outgoing email won't be a problem, but incoming email could be an issue. So if you get anybody that can send us.
I think the biggest thing there is sometimes, because our regular meeting is the 9th,
The 20th.
the 20th. If there's any incoming, sometimes we get late information. Try to get it in early if possible.
Typically what I see in these types of cutovers is maybe 4 to 6 hours max, but everybody says allow up to 48. So, and I've seen it happen in as quick as a half hour.
And sometimes we get last minute information from Audra or somebody else.
So they're just gonna hang in cyberspace until it's actually...
Pretty much. Actually, if somebody sends an email during that transition period, they'll get a bounce back notification that says undelivered.
Okay.
And then hopefully they just resend it or reach out to you by phone. Like I sent you an email, but you didn't get it, so I sent you another one. And you didn't. So,
Didn't get it.
anyway, yes.
Okay.
And we'll put some information, Mayor, on our old website that says we may experience this outage. And if they get a bounce back email, they can call us with their information as well.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. Anything else from you guys? Good job. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's good to see you get it updated because I know we've had some issues from complaints about our website, so it looks like it's very interactive, so it's good. Okay. Okay, on to item 2, water and wastewater rate study. Who is going to give that to us?
Bear with me as I get loaded up.
Well, while it gets loaded,
Thank you,
sure, a few things with the council. Had a customer share a 1975 but utility bill, 47 years ago.
No, nuts.
Yeah, and
You were 13, today is Mark's 60th birthday. Sorry, told me to interrupt.
he's 60 today.
Happy birthday, Mark.
Thank you. But like the sheriff said, 47 years ago, our monthly water was $6.18 a month. Today, it's $16.50 a month. So we're talking at $10.32. It's always gone up in the past 47 years. So that's a factual information. So I wanted you to keep that in mind. A couple of things. I've been up here just a little over 2 years in City Hall. But prior to that, just 2 years ago, fire hydrants, we paid an average of $2,200 in hydrants. This year, they're about $3,200 in hydrant. They got up about $1,000, almost 50%, just in the past 2 years. 8-inch PVC pipe. 2 years ago, we were paying $10.25 a foot. Today, $33.46 a foot. That's gone up about 300%, just in the past 2 years. Brass has gone up about 50% in the past 2 years. Our distribution material, like repair clamps, stress couplers that we used to fix with water mains, they've gone up 40-50% just in the past 2 years. Water treatment, just chemicals, chlorine, fluoride, alum, that type of stuff, they've gone up about 80 to 100% over the past 2 years. I got to ask you, how much do you think trucks, backhoes have gone up in the past 47 years compared to last time? About 1,000%. Employees' health insurance over the past 47 years. And our rates have only gone up $10.32 in the past 47 years. So I just wanted to share that with you before I turned it over to you.
Well, you know, if you look at, I'm not sure if you probably looked at some of the other communities and some of the water cost to the consumers.
Yeah, we're supposed to be getting that.
They're pretty
Some
high.
comparables to what other municipalities and utilities are paying.
You know, that's good to know, because that's something we could pass on to the consumers when this is all,
Yes.
that comes in front of us completely.
Exactly.
That way, we can show that we're still reasonable. It's like what we've done with our other rate studies that we've done. We show them how reasonable we are in comparison to other communities.
Right.
I don't know if there's one community that's way up there.
I don't know if you have it today, but we will have that for you.
It's in today, so
There
you go.
teeing things up, and it's just
Asking you to
exactly
receive, is that what you're saying?
Mark's been asking for a little while.
State your name, please.
My name is Andrew Ream, and the firm that I work for is Raftelis Financial Consultants, or Raftelis. So I've been doing this for about 20 years, working with communities throughout Colorado, the Mountain West, focusing on water, sewer, stormwater, utilities, these types of studies. I did work with the city a few years back. Those of you that may recall, right around 2016, we adjusted sewer rates. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And we looked at water at the time, and there certainly was a gap there, and you know, kind of talk into sort of how we got where we're at today. But backing up sort of near term, the city retained my firm to do a comprehensive evaluation of both the water and wastewater utilities, and covering really just about all the rates and fees, and certainly the major ones. So that's what I'm here today to present the preliminary study findings across long-range evaluation, where we looked at about 10 years through the financial plans, identified some adjustments over that time period. We also looked at the capital recovery fees, or plant investment fees is the term that I use. As we'll see, we get a little bit later, they go by a lot of different names. TAP fee is another one that different communities call that, but it's the one-time fee assessed to new or increased development. And then in terms of some pretty significant changes on the rate structure, while this is informational, we're looking for maybe a little bit of direction after this meeting. I don't necessarily know tonight. It's going to be a lot to take in, a lot of numbers, and but ultimately, as we start incorporating some of the direction, my hope is that we'll land on an alternative. We certainly can carry a couple, but I want to update everyone and get kind of understanding, because before we start the reading cycle for potential changes in 2023, we want to make sure that the information has been provided, and there may be some discussion. And as I
Recording
indicated,
in progress.
it's not as straightforward as just, we're gonna increase user charges a certain amount across the board. We're looking at some structure changes, and that's a lot of the discussion we're gonna have today is, what could that do to different customers? How does this compare to other communities, is the question was raised earlier. So information and certainly the direction we get today will influence the path forward. So now looking back a little bit further, and certainly as Mark had indicated, and based on my understanding, as I had done some work a few years ago, and then as part of this study, Trinidad's not alone in having an imbalance, particularly with the cost of pretty much all goods increasing above, say, long-term averages. So it's not unusual to have an imbalance. It's a little more peaked. But ultimately, we look for our utility rates and fees to do quite a bit of things, as this slide indicates, where we're funding operations, our capital projects, not just maintenance, but also potentially expanding facilities or putting in new facilities. And then we're doing so while we're maintaining some minimum cash reserves. And this may be a little different than general public may sort of anticipate that we only charge exactly what we need in a given year. And while that's true over the long term, there's some minimum cash balances that we want to have as a floor and not fall below, like any kind of enterprise or business. Our working capital, we may pull from reserves in one year, we may replenish them in another, so there's a little bit of an ebb and flow, and it's not that easy of kind of setting rates. And the other part of it is that we don't generally increase and decrease within an industry. Now, Trinidad's history is a little bit more in terms of the major changes to user charges and rates. We got to go back a little bit. And so, as I understand it, I'm going to talk about water first, and then sewer. In the early 2000s, mid 2000s, there was a similar type of comprehensive study following some necessary facilities and loans that the city entered into, and a master plan evaluation or capital plan evaluation. So there was, as I understand, an adjustment put in place at that time, and potentially some rate structure modifications, about 20 years ago. And about 10 years ago, there was some, I think, modest, minor kind of tweaking to, say, the minimum amounts or the minimum volume allowance, but not a significant change in terms of revenue. And then certainly with water, customers use different amounts in different years, depending on weather, as well as, the number of customers. There's certainly been growth within the city that's helped. But it's been roughly 20 years since we had a significant, whether adjustment or increase in water, and then certainly potential structure changes I'm proposing with these alternatives. Now the sewer side is somewhat similar. Back in the 2015-16 evaluation, hopefully I have my timing right, maybe it was 14 or 15, maybe off a year or so. When we looked at both water and sewer was in a pretty poor financial condition at that time. And it had been similar about 20-25 years since the sewer rates had been adjusted. So this is sort of like early 90s, and working with the city, we decided to prioritize the sewer adjustments. And there was a pretty significant adjustment that was put in place in that 15-16 time period after 20-25 years of the rates being largely the same.
I have a comment. I know that in either 2026 or 2027, there's going to be some drastic changes in the sewer systems. I'm not sure, are you aware of those changes yet, of what's coming?
We've incorporated a very significant wastewater treatment project tied to regulatory changes right at that time period. So yeah. I think that's the one that you're talking about as well.
Yeah, they're talking about some significant changes coming up in that time frame that will affect what we do and what every community will do. So need to take those into account as well, so that as we build capacity and funding, that we're able to cover those expenses in that wastewater system.
Very, very good point, Mayor. And that's where, even though that's a few years out into the future, it's influeing and affecting some of the decisions basically in front of this group as far as a step we may want to take in 2023. And there's still some, things to be ironed out about exactly the requirements and the cost of that facility. And
with wastewater, do you network with the EPA in terms of criteria, like with biogas and nutrients?
In what regards?
The wastewater.
Well, no, but I mean, biogas and nutrients,
Yeah.
just,
Some of the additives, do you network with the EPA just to, with the protocol?
I'm a little bit more on the financial side, that type of, this may be more of an engineering operational evaluation, but charging for, say, the extra strengths or the higher strengths for those types of customers that discharge those is certainly a rate issue. And one of the kind of less significant sets of rates that we're evaluating, it's not really in this discussion because there just aren't many customers that are paying it, but certainly the standard sewer rates that are assessed to the vast majority of customers is part of this evaluation. So as I mentioned, whether the history's been a while or recently, these types of balancing, if you will, and this is, how to bring in balances are the evaluations we've completed with the study. And so this is part of the discussion today, whether it's rates, most customers interact with the utility when they get the bill and they pay the bill. I mean, there may be more interactions, but certainly rates are where most customers and policymakers kind of come from it because that's sort of the last part of it. But it begins with a bigger kind of longer range evaluation that looks at the health of the funds and does exactly what the mayor was asking. We look out not just next year, but out into the future. And as best we can, estimate things like growth, what inflation may be, the operating costs, working with city staff, as well as the capital improvement projects. And as we'll see in a few slides, the capital improvement projects for most utilities are significant drivers for the rates and for the funding needs. And that's the case here. So some of those future requirements compounded on top of inflation and history is part of kind of where we're at, and as we look out forward and how we get there.
So, moving forward, do you have any history of how often rate studies such as this should be done? Is it every 5 years, 10 years? What do you see in the industry?
For a community the size of Trinidad, about every 5 years, unless there's a real significant change, like we gotta, meet a regulatory requirement. We have a very significant wastewater treatment plant. If that's off cycle, that may accelerate it. And these types of comprehensive studies, but certainly as the city does annually and throughout the year, whether it's the budget process or tracking financials, and keeping an eye on it. It's
And the
not
reason why I bring that
set
up
it and
is like-
forget it.
It's like, the water, the last time we had a rate increase was way back,
Right.
and it was just not kept up with current or the costs.
And affordability is a big part of that. And that's a tough item to balance. And I'm certainly not here to cast stones on choices or what had happened. It's with life, kind of where you're at, and kind of looking forward, if you will. So just to talk a little bit about these components, and I'm trying not to go into too much detail, but this also largely covers the bulk of the presentation. It first starts with a long-range financial plan, and it helps answer the question, how much money do we need when? In the case of maybe external funding, the timing of that, and what that may do. If we're cash funding everything, that's going to put much more pressure on the need to increase rates and fees much faster, much earlier. So this financial plan, and many utilities balances issuance of debt with cash funding items, as well as we're anticipating some grant funded improvements as well. The cost of service evaluation, which we have completed, I'm not focused in on that today. It will be part of our study recommendations, pretty technical. There's some outcomes of that are into the recommendations, but effectively we look at, and we looked at the water system to answer the question, is everybody paying their fair share? And by everybody, we group different customers into classifications like residential, non-residential, and we've got a couple special call-outs for irrigation-only sort of subset of users, and then some water stations that we've got. They really aren't that much different, but they could be, so we looked at them separately. So that's influencing sort of the findings, but ultimately when it comes to the user charges, how are we going to recover it from our customers? Now, as I spoke to, there's some potential significant changes on the structure, both water and sewer, to generate an increased amount of money.
How much fine tuning do you do? Because it talked about irrigation structures, and I know like the golf course.
Right.
Are you talking about, let's say, the school districts and their fields? Those are the type of areas that you might be different the college, some of these other places like that?
They can be. We focused on the Gulf Fund for kind of calling and evaluating them, but the irrigation only we've kept within the non-residential and commercial, the other ones that you're speaking of, where they are today. Lastly, and the order of this, it comes a little bit earlier in the presentation, but in terms of the one-time fees assessed to new development, is that set so that new growth pays its fair way or fair share into the system as they can act. And I'll talk about some recommendations and some adjustments there as well. So as I've mentioned a couple of times, before I dive into as many of the details, I'm going to kind of go a little bit with an overview in terms of some of the criteria and how that influences the recommendations for the adjustments and the timing of rate and fee adjustments moving forward. So like any utility, within the U.S., within the state, particularly in the enterprise funds, we're essentially looking at establishing our revenues so that they're sufficient to accomplish three goals. The first is that we fund all of our expenses annually. In the recent years, the general fund sometimes has come over and helped out the water fund in terms of when expenses go above what may be anticipated, revenues are a bit below. The second and third requirements are more these financial performance thresholds or financial planning criteria. And so the first one is one that lenders put in place that essentially ensures that there's enough revenues to make the loan payments. And whether it's the state lending money or Wall Street or a commercial bank, effectively we'll put in this legal requirement. And this is in place in just about every enterprise fund or revenue loan because the user charges are what is pledged to repay or make the debt service payments. Next slide, I'll kind of define this a little bit. And the last one's more of that cash reserve that I spoke to earlier, where we're proposing a more formal reserve than what exists today. It 90 days or 25% of O&M. And that functions really as the checking account for the utilities. With utilities, we're providing a service before we're billing it, before we're receiving payment. And particularly in the summertime when most of our revenues on water utility come in, our expenses don't vary the same way our revenues do. So this is 90 days or 3 months of O&M as a kind of a minimum end of year cash reserve we don't want to fall below. It can be a requirement of loans, it often is, whether it's 90 days or something similar. So this is a bit of a baseline recommendation. And we're accomplishing a lot. We're trying to accomplish a lot in a fairly short period of time within the study. So there may be future similar evaluation to establish a minimum capital reserve as well. But adding that on top of what we're trying to accomplish seemed like it was maybe trying to do too much.
Right now, I'm not sure, Mr. Ruger, if it would be you or Cheryl would have the information, the answer on that 90 days. Where are we at right now with reserve operations?
And that would, I don't know, Cheryl.
I don't have that.
Not you? Okay.
Sorry, but we can get that for you, Mayor.
Okay.
Just to talk a little bit more and define what this debt service coverage test or requirement is. As I mentioned earlier, it's something that the lenders put in place that basically takes our annual revenue and we subtract off our operation and maintenance expenses, labor, personnel, chemicals, power, those types of things, meter reading. So the result of that is revenue available for debt service and capital. Capital kind of comes after debt service. If you think about, we're paying our suppliers, our employees first, and then making our debt payments, and then cash funding capital and meeting reserve requirements. So this net revenue divided by annual debt service, if we've got one, it means that we've got revenue after operation and maintenance expenses and enough to pay the annual debt service. Anything above one means that it flows down to capital and is available for capital or replenishing reserves or future capital in future years. The legal requirements do vary depending on the lender. I'm anticipating that the city is more likely going to borrow from the state, and that tends to be a little bit on the lower end of this range at 110% of annual debt service, although it goes up to 125%, particularly if your communities issuing debt directly through Wall Street or some other lenders still kind of require that a bit higher one. For rate setting, I'm proposing and recommending that we evaluate, and it can be a driver for increasing rates. As we'll see, we don't always make it each and every year, but rather than kind of a legal minimum, we're targeting 1.5 as a minimum we don't want to fall below, and that may affect and influence, as it has within the long-range recommendations, the need to adjust or increase revenues. Now, when it comes to some of the big drivers, you've heard all of this from me already, but excuse me. So first and foremost is funding expenses. The cost of things is going up, or the future capital that we've identified and city staff has identified, whether regulatory driven or capacity driven, or just based on the need to replace and repair something that's declined due to its old age. And so these all kind of are in this broad sort of back bucket of inflationary drivers. If we were doing just what we've always done, it's going to cost more tomorrow, it's going to cost more the next year, as we've all experienced the last few years, more significantly than maybe the long-range averages. That second component is where things end up including additional expenses, not only what we have done, but whether it's a regulatory-driven wastewater treatment plant requirement or capacity-driven in terms of the need to have new water tanks or potentially new wastewater or water treatment plant. Now, and I referenced this, whether it was through the marijuana cultivation tax revenue going towards sort of some dedicated improvements within the water fund or leveraging grant-funded dollars, or a little bit where the fund and the amounts just aren't there, and the general fund is basically moving over to step in for the water and sewer fund because the expenses exceeded what the revenues that came in or what we had in place. As well as these additional cash reserves and planning targets. Those are the other drivers that get incorporated within the recommendations. And as I said earlier, we're trying to do all of this in somewhat of a dynamic environment. And I will indicate that estimating a capital project out a few years right now is more difficult than it has been. It's always difficult, but it's more difficult than it has been. And the timing of the state, is it going to, the permit on the wastewater treatment plant, there's certainly things to be flushed out. And while we do our best and we're estimating and projecting out this multi-year period, like any kind of projection, we feel better about it in the near term, and as the time goes on, we feel less confident about it just because the variables and moving pieces compound on each other. So in terms of, and I've broken up the recommendations so I can kind of come back to it at the end, but in the different components. So when we're talking about the financial plan, I do think that, as one of the questions earlier indicated, that, it makes sense to complete these types of evaluations a little more frequently than, say, the city has, and including on whether it's the capital side or the facility side. And particularly ahead of some of these major potential projects and potential debt issuances. So I think just kind of updating and maintaining this doesn't necessarily need to be this type of a study every year, but just that kind of annual maintenance, keeping an eye on this, and the things that go to the cities on the positive ledger, and the things that'll go the other way. That capital piece is pretty significant, and one of the recommendations that'll help at things like the one-time capital recovery fee or the user charges, adjusting the planned investment fee more frequently. There's recommendations that I've already highlighted in terms of some financial planning policies, and as I indicate here in the last sub-bullet, that a capital reserve or kind of a capital component in addition to that 90 days is something that we may want to look at, kind of a future rate study. But trying to do that while we're trying to accomplish everything else seemed like we're piling on a little bit. And something that maybe we can wait and may not be as high a priority as some of the other things that we're looking to accomplish. And then the last one, and a lot of this comes to the compounding effect of smaller, more frequent. So even, if it's passing through inflation in between more comprehensive evaluations such as this, having customers used to annual changes, even if they're small, and the indexing for inflation for planned investment fee, moving forward, I think is going to be important. And as we'll see in a minute, I'm proposing and projecting the need to have annual rate adjustments that are above inflation in most years because of some of the other things that we're trying to accomplish. But just from kind of a best practice moving forward, this is one of them. And if we wait, it doesn't have to be as long as but even waiting between 5 years, things accumulate and compound, and then the customers get that rate shock. And it's like smaller, more frequent seems to be a way to kind of stay on top of inflation, but also mitigate for periodic, sort of more significant increases like we're looking at today.
Explain DSC target and PIF adjustments.
I'm sorry.
DSC target?
The debt service coverage target is one of the recommendations.
And the PIF?
That's the one-time capital recovery fee. So in between these types of studies, many of my clients and what we recommend is increasing that annually for inflation. And there's an index that we tend to tie that to. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the water fund, and certainly as questions come up, let me know. I'm going to try and maybe fly at a higher level, but I can certainly dive down as needed. So I'm starting with capital because the capital facilities are a significant driver. And this is just water, so we're going to talk about sewer shortly. So over this 10-year period, we average about $3.4 million a year. Now we've got the different bars colored between cash funded, debt funded, or grant funded around that particular year. So again, over this 10-year period, we're anticipating and projecting about $25 million in new debt. And as we can go out to 2029, there's a projected water treatment plant project, new plant, that is the bulk of those debt issuances, although there certainly is some with a new tank in 2024. So it's those two large projects together that we're anticipating issuing some debt. And we have identified some specific water lines that we're pretty confident that we'll be able to get some grant funding for. So that's also in 2024. And the balance of the projects in plan, whether they're small projects or larger ones, we're anticipating funding with cash at about a little less than $9 million over this planning period. But as the chart indicates, it's not a smooth, equal amount each year. It varies up and down. And as we issue debt, we'll pay that back through annual debt service that stretches out over the long range. So it helps us fund it, gives us the liquidity to do it, and then there's a liability that'll come, and this also influences the results. If we try to cash fund this all, it would be much, much more significant than what we're projecting and proposing. And on the positive side, certainly some communities kind of bank their capital improvement program on the ability to get grants. So if you get a grant, the project moves forward. If you don't get a grant and the money's not there, then the project kind of gets deferred and delayed. So rather than anticipating and incorporating maybe optimistic, which I think the city's had a great track record with receiving grants, how grants are the process that I think the city's in a good position to get future grants. We just don't want to bank on. So I think this is where, if we're successful, this plan will get better over time.
Let me ask you a question. Why did you pick 2029 as a new facility? I mean, what's the significance there?
I'll certainly defer, city staff. We work with city staff on the long-range capital plan, and that's where it's timed and anticipated to be needed. But beyond that, I'll certainly defer to city staff.
Do we have anybody that could answer that?
Mark, do you know the answer to that question?
That's the new water treatment plant, the supplemental water treatment plant that we want to try to get in place.
Is that the one that you?
The funding for that is going to take some time.
There's no particular reason why you picked that date?
No particular reason. We just figured that's more or less how long it's going to take to
That was
get
kind
it
of,
completed.
that was kind of my driver. One of the, there are feasibility studies up front. You're looking at least about a year. You're looking at the design process, another year, year and a half. bidding, you're out a year. Construction, you're out 5 years, 5-6 years minimum if things go well.
What do you,
And that's typical for building a new water treatment plant.
what are you looking at as far as the area for the water plant? Are you gonna continue to do the area up there by North Lake, or thinking about doing the deal down here at the dam?
We'd like to explore all options, but the two main drivers, the main driver is redundancy. Right now, the entire valley is dependent on one plant 40 miles away with a 40-mile transmission line. So we do need redundancy in case of failure. The other would be growth, and we want to anticipate growth. We want a plant that we're going to kind of grow into, not something that's going to be a stopgap. And so the other issue is that we have a substantial investment in Trinidad Lake. Right now, our water's not being used as efficiently as it should be. A new plant probably down here would change that for us.
Yeah, the only reason I ask that is that if you're waiting, 6 or 7 years, the expense is gonna go up even that much more. So that would be the only question, is that why you pick that far down the list there. Is there some reason other than, I know financially it's gonna be kind of tough, but also might be a lot easier to work on something in the near future than to wait that far down the line as far as expense goes, because like you say, just an example, like you used the PVC pipe, it's almost tripled from what it was. So if you're looking at, different things for the plant, we have to get land acquisition, we have to get other stuff over there. Is there, are we looking at doing work now on it, or are we just waiting to do it back in 2029?
I've started that process. I have a plan in place that needs to be funded. The real issue, and I guess I'm on my soapbox right now, from a grant funding, from looking at it that way, reactive projects tend to get funded. Proactive projects are last. So that's...
Because I know during some of the legislature here, there was some money available for, infrastructure, water and stuff like that. Have we looked into getting anything like that?
We applied for, he put in for an application for some of that money.
Yeah, that's what I say, so.
We haven't heard anything on that though, have we?
Yes, it was a proactive project and I didn't make the list.
What we did get, December 18th, we're supposed to get funded on some infrastructure. So,
if it's something that's already broken, you can fix it, but if it's something that you're planning, it's a little harder.
Well, yeah, I understand that, but the more we wait, the more expenses gets, That's the only issue I have with that. I mean, I understand that we just can't go out and do it right now, but I thought, it would be a little easier to try to get it done as soon as we can.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, continue.
Well, and certainly a significant driver, certainly along those lines, and just to add to what Gil had indicated, we do have some engineering studies built in before the construction to evaluate with feasibility, and answer some of the questions or dive a little deeper. And it goes much beyond than, in terms of what the engineers and operators look at that. But, kind of sometimes a little sequence and something that's significant, it can certainly takes a few years, and then the funding side as well, as Gil indicated. So how do we get there? And so as I talked about, we've got two different alternatives developed that generate additional revenue that has been identified as part of this study. So the effect on individual customers is going to vary because of the structure change. And what this picks up is some of those structure changes. In 2022, this typical user at 1,000 cubic feet, their bill, it's the minimum amount, $16.50 a month. And under both alternatives 1 and 2, proposing nominal increase, anywhere from $12 to $14 in that first year. And again, this is on that typical customer. We'll look at some additional information when we get into those alternatives. And then moving forward, we're anticipating the need to annually adjust, and I'll show you why in a minute. These charges, so after 23, these are applying those adjustments the same to both of these alternatives. We need X amount of revenue in a given year, and so that translates to a bill of this amount. And this certainly anticipating for this comparison and illustration purposes that one of the two alternatives as it's currently designed would be selected. And certainly as we're looking out, and it's a bit of a future discussion, but my understanding, we're not asking for multi-year rate adoptions when we get into that ordinance hearing, but this is looking out further, not just kind of next year, the next couple of years, to see how some decisions we may make earlier in this period are driven by things that aren't necessarily this year. So one of those drivers is that cash reserve balance that I mentioned. What this shows is, we're forecasting 22 to end, and then projecting 23 through 2031. The bar charts give the end of year cash balances. And then that line, that 90 days or 25% of O&M, we can see that as we're building up some of those cash funds to help cash fund a portion of that water treatment plant, we're having reserves well above that minimum. And then 2029, when that project is executed through 31, we're right at our target, or right about there. The first couple of years, we're still working our way to that. And again, this is a internal policy, so we've got a little bit of room. And we can get there faster, but it would just mean that the 23 rate adjustments would be higher in order to have the cash to meet that target a little bit earlier. We get there by about 25, and as you can see, we're above it or at the target in the subsequent years. So that's in part influencing the need to adjust things. We're also not anticipating direct funding from the general fund in any of these years, 23 through 31. And so, having user charges and fees that generate that revenue is another one of those steps. And we've got some initial projects also identified that if we went back a couple slides that we're addressing in this first few years. So this cash reserve and kind of the liquidity is one of the significant drivers that's affecting not just 23, but then the subsequent adjustments over time, particularly with the potential water treatment plant project towards the end of this 10-year period.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
When we're talking the kind of one slide back, but when we're looking at those rate increases, are those average of residential, commercial, and not extraterritorial? Is that an average?
This is a profile customer, so it's a customer with a 3/4 inch meter or smaller, which is most of the residential
Right.
customers we have, some commercial, and using 1,000 cubic feet. And with the rate structure changes, I'm proposing a different sort of rate structure that would get to be in effect for residential customers. So this is just a residential customer monthly bill that uses 1,000 cubic feet.
So extraterritorial and in city limits are the same cost?
They're different. The ones outside the city,
Right.
there's a higher rate that's charged. I'm going to speak to that.
Okay,
But the focus here was certainly inside
Okay.
city for this comparison.
got it.
And the multiplier is still proposed to kind of be maintained for the extraterritorial or outside city customers.
And on the residential, is that the average for what you figured there for usage? The 7,500 gallons?
It is about the annual average. Now, each month's gonna, particularly summer months, are gonna be higher. There's a comparison that walks through this kind of typical customer that lands at 10 CCF for the year, as well as the sewer component. Right at the end of the presentation, kind of walk through each month and show the bills today and under the alternatives to help explain, because there's going to be some changes that reduce people's bills on the sewer side, and then others that increase it and kind of over the year. And different types of water users are going to be affected a little differently under the proposed water rate structures. So it was a little, and I apologize, I didn't explain the slide very well, so thank you for stopping me. It's an important component, and we'll come back to different comparisons that also look at that typical user. So the sort of last financial planning target or criteria, this is the water fund's annual debt service coverage. And so as we can see, we've got these lines that are the sort of that legal requirement as well as the target of 150%. So in the early years, we're doing quite well. We're well above this. We have a lot of money, not just to pay the debt service payment, the one water loan we have, but also to flow down and fund capital, as we saw, as we're accumulating reserves kind of in the out years. So as the projected debt issuance for the water treatment plant comes online, we've got higher debt service. So then it becomes harder to meet. And we can see that, the cumulative effect of the rate adjustments go all the way out to 2031, and we're right at that target. Right, we're a little bit below and out 8 years, but ultimately being at that 1.5 or 150% debt service coverage target, coupled with the reserve criteria, those are working in tandem to drive the rate recommendations. So I'm going to jump to sewer and talk through basically the same information, but just for the sewer fund. So, and a lot of this is come up through the questions and the discussion already, but we've got a little less sort of individual projects, while the annual average is a little bit higher on the sewer side, about 3.6 million, again, over that same 10-year period. You can see the blend that we're anticipating, certainly some external debt. A little bit more in grants, with a lot of that being tied to the wastewater treatment plant expansion project, as indicated, anticipated in 2027. We're also anticipating a much smaller grant, but a grant for a Headworks building, a set of improvements the city's been looking to do, and has been on the kind of that list of things that need to get done. That particular project's in 2024. So, we're anticipating some grant funding, largely the debt, if it's exclusively around that treatment plant project. And then similar to water, the bulk of the projects are cash funded. I didn't mention this in the water side, but I want to emphasize it here, and affects both water and sewer. We're building in funding for whether it's line repairs, replacement, miscellaneous capital outlay, both in the water and sewer fund. That's a portion of the cash funded improvements. So it's more of that reactive, we're not sure exactly what may need focus in addition to these individual projects, but it's the type of things that tend to happen, annually or almost is often. And so.
Let me interrupt something I was going to say. You still have quite a bit to go through here.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of stuff to do within our agenda. Any recommendations? Do you want to continue to go through this completely, or do you want to bring him back? Because at this rate, we're going to be about 4 hours.
Yeah.
So I think that's a concern for not. We have people waiting in line here too. So.
Mr. Mayor, I think we should have Andrew go through the rest of the slides as quickly as possible,
Okay.
and maybe if the council would be willing to maybe hold off on questions, and then we can provide those afterwards. This certainly won't be your only opportunity to discuss this.
Okay.
My apologies, and
You got no worries.
In terms of a typical customer bill, similar comparison today. This is anticipating 6 CCF for a sewer customer, and with the charges that are in place today, that's a $35 monthly bill. Similar to water, we're proposing some structure changes, so there's a bit of a step up between these two alternatives that we see in that first year. And then subsequent, it's applying across the board adjustments or increases, showing what that monthly sewer portion of the bill would be, again, for a typical residential customer. Similar types of drivers. Again, this is end of year cash balances or projected cash balances within the sewer fund. We're a little bit above that target, if you will. And as I look, I've got an extra year in 2032 that is throwing this off. I apologize for that. It's run through 2031. But we're exceeding that minimum cash balance. Little less significant on the sewer side in terms of the variance of capital projects as we looked at that chart. But as we look to debt fund a portion of the wastewater treatment plant expenditures in 2027, similar to water, as that debt comes online, that creates debt service coverage pressure as we see in the out years. So again, kind of going back, and it's influencing and affecting the rate recommendations in 23. It's not quite flat. We've got some higher ones that are right before that treatment plant project. So, as we get to the 23 recommendations and rates, it's not necessarily driven based on something that's out 10 years, but it's influenced by it. And meeting this criteria and certainly the liquidity measures that we talked about a minute ago. I'll pick up the pace a little bit without losing some of the content, but I'm going to switch gears briefly to the one-time system development fees. Sometimes it's called plant investment fee. So I'm not going to go through and in the interest of time and reading these, but I just want to make it clear that this is for new or increased development. So if the existing customers upsizing their meter, or more specifically, what is a new customer connecting to the system. So these fees don't affect the existing users, is what I want to emphasize. They're intended to pay for capital, whether that's debt service or cash funded capital. And just some additional information, as I mentioned earlier, they go with a lot of different names. So let me jump to what is being assessed today. We've got two pieces of this. There's a water plant investment fee that increases by meter size, which is the most common way to assess it. And you see the value starting at $1,250 for the base connection. On the sewer side, it's assessed today based on the sewer pipeline. So that's different than the water meter, but just think of a 4-inch is the minimum residential side. So new residential customers are being assessed the $1,500 one-time sewer plant investment fee. We'll get into some comparisons in a minute, as well as this slide in terms of some recommendations. So it's been some time, and the plant investment fees, certainly as we compare to others, we'll see that the existing fees, I don't know that they don't recover the impact of new development on the system, and they haven't been updated in a little while. So we're proposing to increase the value of those fees and have them be assessed by meter size. It's a slight adjustment for sewer, so rather than it be based on sewer pipeline size. Majority of utilities, and there's some variance with this, but most also assess sewer based on the water meter size as well. And so it's just a little easier, a little more administratively feasible to have both of them being assessed basically on the same thing with a similar justification. As I mentioned earlier, indexing annually for inflation will keep this fee more current with inflation in between these types of periodic studies. And then particularly as we're looking at some major capital, whether it's master plan or engineering studies or specifically around these improvements, that may give us some information that'll have us looking at the plant investment fee again. That may be one of those things that's out of cycle, if you will. And as I'll speak to, there's different methodology. I don't want to go through this, but basically there are some that are more appropriate depending on where the capacity is that we're adding. Or if we've got a new wastewater treatment plant, or we're basically having to retrofit it, then that cost of wastewater treatment facilities is based on that future project. So this may be something that evolves a bit, but for the fees that I'm recommending, it's based on this backward looking. That's effectively the facilities that are in the ground today. And so, as I mentioned, it may be more expensive on a unit cost basis moving forward, but at least based on what we've constructed in place, we're seeing the need to adjust or increase both of these fees. So, as referenced here, it's based on this buy-in or backward looking. When we basically go through and we're valuing the existing system, and then we're looking at the number of 3/4 inch meter equivalents, that base meter size that we've got in the system, and effectively asking new development to sort of buy in to their fair share of that. And that gives us the fee for the 3/4 inch meter. And then we increase that and scale that up by meter size so that I'm proposing to increase the water fee to $3,000 for, and I'm going to talk about a residential customer, and then the sewer fee to $2,000. We've got the same for 3/4 inch and basically smaller. Most of the new connections are coming in at 3/4 inch. There may, certainly could be some, but those 5/8 by 3/4 inch tend to be the older housing stock, and just generally smaller and fewer water fixtures. So again, that $5,000 one-time plant investment fee is what is being proposed here. In terms of how does this compare, we looked at some nearby utilities as well as a couple larger ones in the region. Well, one on this slide, the city of Pueblo and Pueblo Water. And as we can see, the current city fees are kind of in the middle of this group, maybe a little bit on the low end. Whether it's Alamosa, Lamar, and La Junta are below the city when we combine the two. And then under what is proposed, this kind of brings the city, certainly nominally well below Pueblo, but a little bit on the higher end of the survey group. And and the scale on this, we're talking within $1,000 to $2,000. So the scale makes it the gap seem a little bit bigger than what I would indicate or what would I think would affect or influence development decisions, even if somebody's sort of shopping around, maybe a master plan community. We can talk in the future about this. There's some trade-offs and some considerations, but ultimately this is a one-time fee. So as that new customer connects, it's something utilities kind of miss out on if you're not assessing it, or if it's assessed at the lower amount. And certainly those customers, once they connect, they become ratepayers and are part of the system as well. So it's to kind of defray those impacts. I'm going to switch to the water rate structure and talk a little bit about the existing structure before we get into some potential changes. So that it follows a very common approach where we've got a fixed component of the bill and then a volumetric component. So we see on the left side what the fixed component is. Again, increases by meter size. This also functions as a minimum for many customers, many residential customers, where 1,000 cubic feet or 10 CCF is included with that 1650. And then if you use more than 10 CCF, you're billed $1.65 per 100 cubic feet. So effectively, that base rate is just $16.50 divided by 10, or $1.65 built into that fixed charge or flat charge. We've got a couple other water stations we charge $8.27 per CCF, and it's highlighted the Gulf Fund. It isn't assessed today for water, so there's no volumetric rate. And these work in conjunction to generate and develop the user charges across all users. And there's certainly some adjustments for the outside city customers. So when it comes to some of the rate recommendations, proposing to either eliminate or significantly reduce that minimum water allowance. And that's included in both alternatives. Alternative 1 eliminates it completely. And alternative 2 has 400 cubic feet built into a similar base rate, a higher base rate. So that's kind of the first set of recommendations. The second one is a little, and this is a little tricky, but we're proposing that we modify how we bill water. The meters that are in place today are gallon meters. They used to be cubic feet meters, so we bill in cubic feet because historically that's how we've done it. But our billing system and customer service is converting the meter readings from gallons to CCF only to bill. So this change would have us going to gallons and billing per 1,000 gallons. And it doesn't, it changes the rate and the allowances, but it's just formulaic. And because the customers and even the meter readings I understand on the bills are shown in gallons, so it's really confusing. So this is just a change that we're proposing now that we've got gallon meters, that we start billing that way, now that we're looking at changing our rates. Before it didn't make sense because the city had modified rates. Proposing is the case that we increase the base rate by meter size, standardize for all our outside city customers, and apply a single multiplier. It's generally the case for water, but of 1.5 times the inside city rate, just the base rate and the volume charges. As I spoke to, charge the Gulf Fund and really any other users that aren't being charged for water, like other customers, and the Gulf Fund's by far the most significant user that isn't being charged today. There's some separation, some of it's in place, but I talked about this earlier that we looked at some different classes of users, and that influenced the rate recommendations really to keep residential and non-residential having sort of separate structures moving forward for those customers. And implementing tiered rates for residential customers and increasing those by meter size for those residential customers that are larger than that 3/4 inch meter. And then assessing uniform rates for all other customers, generally grouped together as non-residential customers. And in doing so, we're going to improve the customer class cost of service and equity from the demands these different groups of users place on our system. While it's not the focus today, there's some additional rates and fees that we're evaluating and looking at. And like any type of thing where the cost is changing, just a general recommendation for the city to evaluate, maybe not annually for all of these, but periodically adjust things and evaluate whether may want to make a change for things that are non-rate revenue but fees that the utilities assess. This is more for reference. I guess the one mistake that I caught when I was looking through this, the minimum volume use in the base rate, that first line, Alternative 2 does maintain a lower minimum than is in place today. But other than that, what this tries to do, this is a little bit more of reference, is compare and contrast the current rate structure with the two alternatives that are being proposed. This comparison side by side shows the monthly service charge of the base rate increasing by meter size. You'll see the size of the meter, the current assessment. It does include a minimum allowance today. And then under Alternative 1 or Alternative 2, how that would compare. So this is just the fixed fee before we look at volume or usage and what that dollar change would be. The vast majority of the customers we have on the system are 3/4 inch and smaller. So that's where most of the impacts may be felt, at least in terms of the individual users. And then certainly we have fewer of the larger meter sizes, but dollar amounts get a little bit bigger when it comes to this base rate. On the volume side, I'm going to maybe take a minute here and talk a little bit. The current volume rates and a summary of those are on the left side. There's two kind of components to this rate structure recommendation. So the first is that we looked at implement tiered rates for residential customers. Something the city does not have. The city kind of gets dinged sometimes for that, where being in Colorado and sending that pricing signal to customers for different types of usage. So this is something that we had identified early in the study is something new that we wanted to introduce. And so under Alternative 1, the first 800 cubic feet are proposed to be priced at $1.30 per CCF. And then when you get above that 800 cubic feet up to 2,000 cubic feet, the price is proposed to go up to $1.95. And then for those users, again, this is just residential, that use higher than 2,000 cubic feet, generally summer bills, and the irrigation season, that rate would be $3.12. Now, the rate today above 10 CCF is $1.65. So you can see that there's, this is where some of the differences and changes could be felt depending on the bill and the time of year. Under Alternative 1, it's the exact same tiers, exact same tier pricing. The difference is that first 400 cubic feet, we've incorporated in that flat charge, similar to today, where that's a minimum, whether you use 100, 200, 300, or 400 cubic feet, you'd be assessed 1975. And then as you get above that 400 cubic feet, the tiered rates would start to kick in the same way they do under Alternative 1. And then the kind of the balance of the customers, non-residential and golf, we basically have all non-residential and users paying that middle tier, $1.95. So there's some commonality across customers. And then the handful of water stations that we have, that is one of the higher rates that we've got, the highest rate, $8.27. We're proposing to increase that to $9 per thousand gallons. I'm sorry, per CCF. This picks up at the 100 cubic feet intervals from 0 all the way to 30 CCF, what the bill would be. As we can see, it's flat at that 1650 under the lower bar today. Alternative 2 has got that same kind of flat charge through the 400 cubic feet. And Alternative 1, as we talked about, starts at the 1650, and then each 1,000 gallons increases. And you can see the lines bend where the tier breaks happen. So as we go from, say, that $1.30 to $1.95, the line kind of goes up. And then when that 312 kicks in at 20 CCF, we see it increase again. Most of the bills we have are on the left side of this ledger, but certainly summer seasonal irrigation bills is where the right side picks up, and where we see more of those bills. So to focus a little bit more on that first 10 CCF, this is really one of the dangers of the minimum usage threshold, is that it's fixed. And so on one hand, we're not giving customers the ability to influence or affect their bill by their usage, but we're also, that's where most of the bills are for residential customers. So there's a trade-off between these two. And this just shows the same information. It's just kind of zoomed in on the first 10 CCF and those customers. And by design, we'll see some differences. And I've got some information towards the end that'll speak to those differences. I'm going to jump into sewer and talk about a couple of the structure elements as well as the existing structure. So sewer is got a similarity to water in that we've got a fixed charge. In the case of sewer, it doesn't include any minimum allowance. So that's truly a minimum charge. And then the volume side is $1.25 for residential customers for each 1,000 gallons of usage. Non-residential or all others are billed at $2.06 per 100 cubic feet. Now there's a maximum of $40 for the sewer bill for residential customers. So basically everybody's between $27.50 and $40. And there's some reasons why the maximum is built in, and it's essentially because we bill based on monthly water usage. Or 85% of the customer's monthly water usage gives us the volume component for the sewer bill. So picture yourself if you've got a seasonal spike in the summertime. Well, you're going to go above that effectively 10 CCF. So that's where the maximum comes in. It says, okay, we think everybody is discharging sewer somewhere between 0 and 10. So that's where this minimum and maximum comes in. There's others for non-residential, and it's very confusing. If you've ever read the sewer code, I do this for a living, and you work through the math, but it's a little complicated, and there's a potential for confusion, for error, for things just not getting updated. So we're proposing, I'll get to the next slide, that we just simplify it. And one of the ways that we can simplify it is rather than charge everybody based on a certain percentage of their monthly water use, that we know includes some that goes on people's yards. I mean, it just does. That we assess this based on a winter period average. Take 85% of November through February months and use that to assess volume. There's going to be a handful of customers that have sewer flow meters, or like the State College, a couple others, that we maybe have a better sense of what's coming from indoor usage, because outdoor is somewhat separated. So there may be some exceptions where for those users we maintain based on the sewer flow meter, but the vast majority are billed today, and we're proposing to modify that to this winter period average that effectively gets set once and then you pay that like a fixed bill the entire year, and then it gets reset the next year based on your more recent winter period average. It's more common within the industry and primarily how sewer volume is determined for residential customers. So I've already gotten into the recommendations. Just simplify by eliminating the minimums and maximums across the users and classes. And married with number 2, that only works if we modify how we're assessing the volume rate to be focused in this winter period where we don't generally measure sewer flows. So we're having to use something that's a little imperfect. And this average winter period use volume usage is sort of the best of the options that we have, unless we're going to meter everybody, which doesn't make sense. Assessing similar to water for non-residential, increasing by the water meter size for the base rate. With sewer and this, I'm proposing we maintain a flat fee for residential for sewer. Multifamily or apartment complex will be a little different, but just in terms of a little bit of simplicity for the sewer calculation. That we use that 85% of the average winter consumption. As I spoke to earlier, I'm using November through February. The utilities, as I said, most utilities I work with have this in place, and in March they recalculate based on that 4-month period, and it gets modified in terms of that customer's bill in April. Similar to how it functions today, but it basically becomes a fixed volume amount that we anticipate until that customer gets reset in the next year. Standardizing the outside city multiplier, this is where there's some differences built in, and then having a single volume rate for commercial and residential, as the question came up earlier, when we anticipate it's basically going to be domestic flows. And not those extra strength customers that put higher strength concentrations that are assessed surcharges, but it would be a single domestic rate for all users, absent you being an excess strength customer. And then that last bullet, similarly, that just updating miscellaneous rates and fees hadn't been the focus of this presentation, but keeping that in place over time. Similar to water, this tries to do a side-by-side of kind of more of the direct rate related, comparing how it's done in the current structure, and then under these 2 alternatives. With the base rate component, similar to water, we've got these compared, increasing by meter size, so that we've got an adjustment in that fixed charge for both alternative 1, a higher adjustment under alternative 2. And what this does is we'll see in a minute, that the volume rate is going to be lower under alternative 2. Both of these are designed to generate the same amount of revenue, and it's a bit of a trade-off between what we're getting in that sort of fixed for base rate and what we may be generating under the volume rate itself. The bill impacts on sewer are going to be tricky because of if approved as proposed, because we're changing a few things at once, and particularly that volume component, instead of it being based on monthly water use. So what we'll see is sewer volumes are going to go down in the wintertime. Going to go down in the summertime and the sewer portion of the bill. And it's going to be a little flatter year-round. As we talked about, there's going to be some changes on the water rate side. So between these, the customer bill impacts are going to be all over the place. And it's not going to be kind of a standard. It's going to be based on where that usage is, the type of customer, where they're located. So I just want to highlight that it gets a little tricky. But from a structure standpoint, under proposed, this is more simplified. When we get beyond the change in how we're billing it or how we're calculating the volume, it's a same rate for residential and commercial. Within the city, it would be the same rate for those customers outside the city. And it's just this trade-off between the fixed charge and the volume charge between these sets of users. And the amount of revenue we generate is the same across alternatives 1 and 2 in total. So this compares, and this is it's a little tricky, but again, somebody may be getting to that 10 CCF level, different time period of the year, but for residential customer, we're going to be capped out at $40 a month today. Under what is proposed,
that would increase somebody's bill, but again, most of the sewer users are going to be in that lower side of things and closer to zero, where somewhere between 4 and 6 CCF is kind of that average, that typical for a residential home, depending on the number of occupants typically. So I know I flew through things pretty quickly. The last kind of set of things are two comparisons. So this first one I want to talk about, I'll spend a minute on. I referenced this earlier in the presentation. So because of the changes between the structure across water and sewer, it's less easy to see how this is going to influence customer bills, or even kind of typical bills. So this tracks out a typical kind of customer each month, and you'll notice the water volume. It's all in CCF. Is in that winter period, and then as we increases when we get into that sort of what I call shoulder season, or some of that early spring into the peak irrigation season, and then starts to decline. Over the year, it averages 10 CCF and this 100 cubic feet over the year. So for sewer, we take 85% of that monthly volume, but we cap it at the 10 CCF. So this shows the effect of the cap. I mean, just quick math. A July bill, it would be 17 CCF at that 85%. We cap it at the 10. And under the average winter consumption, or what's proposed for sewer in the next column, it would be based on that average monthly usage. Is shown here for this customer. It's 4 CCF, somewhat of a simplification, but so that sewer volume, subject to the sewer volume, is going to change by design. And then we take, and I've taken the current bill with the current rates and current rate structure and calculated them each month. So for this typical customer throughout the year, they're paying just under $700 in water and sewer combined. That average is about $57 a month. Under alternative 1, that will increase. And some parts of the month it'll change, but generally it's going to go up. And as that's depicted here, that translates to an average monthly amount of about $76 under that structure. So I mean, it is an increase, roughly $19 a month for this typical user. Using less, using more, different kind of profile, they're going to be impacted somewhat differently. But the intent is a typical or average customer. Under alternative 2, that increase isn't quite as much. It's a couple dollars less per month on average, has been calculated in the last 2 columns, or the last 2 rows, total it up, and then just do a simple average throughout the year. So, it's a pretty big step in one step. And, kind of going back to the drivers, we do our best to kind of levelize things out to avoid these spikes, but just that things have accumulated. We're kind of bunched up on this front end with a big step, and then getting into annual adjustments thereafter, which the city would certainly update annually, or maybe driven based on these long-range or long-term reinvestments or investments in capital facilities. So as promised earlier, how do we compare? And this takes the same kind of typical customer, and whether it's 10 CCF or the sewer volume, there's a little nuance for Trinidad in that based on the current rate structure at 85%, the sewer volume is a little higher for typical customer. So this shows if we go to that winter period average, that there'd be some reduction net of the other changes. So as we track this, Walsenburg is the highest in the group. Colorado Springs is the next, right around $100 a month. La Junta, as we can see, some of these that charge lower plant investment fees end up having higher rates, not uniformly, but there is a little bit of that relationship. And then similar to the plant investment fee slide, today the typical customer in Trinidad's paying about $50, a little more than $50 a month. And then, again, this is a little bit of a simplification. This is not picking up that change in the water bill throughout the year, but at 1,000 cubic feet, what that would be under alternatives 1 and 2, they're pretty close. It's about a $2 difference between kind of that combination. And I haven't run the mathematical average, but just kind of looking at these, under this alternative 1 and 2, Trinidad would be close to that average of the survey group, maybe a little bit higher. I will add that many of these same entities are having similar discussions, or had them, about what to do with inflation, regulatory drivers, anticipated capital improvements. So this is kind of looking in the back, a rearview mirror as we're moving forward. So it's a little imperfect in that some of these entities may have some changes that come in place in 2023. I know Pueblo is one that tends to do annual rate adjustments. This is their current rates, so those will certainly change, or I anticipate those could change moving forward. So the rest of it's just a statement of the recommendations that cut across the financial plan, plant investment fees, and the water and sewer rate recommendations. In the interest of time, I certainly can go back to any one of these, but I'm not going to kind of rehash those. And I talked about earlier, just full circle, in terms of next steps, we're anticipating, as we get direction and we finalize things, we've got certainly to go through the ordinance reading and formal process, which we haven't begun. We're anticipating these would go into effect in April, and there's certainly some benefit in having this change in effect before the irrigation season takes off. Ideally, we would have been done earlier, and these may be going into effect in January. There's also a little bit of strategy with that April date, that if the change to how sewer volume is calculated is part of what's implemented or adopted, then that would occur in March with the change in the volume for sewer being effective in the April bill. So if we were to say have these in effect in February, and then the person's volume changes, and in month 2, it's going to feel like the rates didn't they just change? So we've intentionally somewhat synced these on April because of the idea that we don't want to kind of tinkering or have these changes in the perception that we just increased rates, we increased them again. We didn't, but at any rate, we've synced those together. There is, with these types of structure changes, this isn't outside the world. We're not redoing something. These are all in line with what many other utilities do, but there's an implementation side of this, whether it's reprogramming billing system or just outreach and customer understanding. So that's another reason for a bit of this gap, setting aside going through the formal readings and finalizing the structures themselves. So I just wanted to add a couple of those components. So sorry, a little fast forward through the end there, but any questions or comments?
Questions from council at this point in time? No?
A lot to digest.
Yeah.
A lot to
a lot to
digest.
do.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Steve, just out of curiosity, the committed funds discussion, how long will that take, do you anticipate?
Cheryl, what do you think, 10, 15 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah.
If it was going to take longer than that, I was going to reverse that and go to the
We might want to
marijuana.
reverse that and go to marijuana anyway.
Because we have staff here and.
Yeah, it's probably better to do marijuana first.
Okay. So let's go ahead and fast forward to item number 4, the third quarter marijuana funding.
So I don't know if it works if we did something like that.
Alrighty, council, in your drive, you should have received the third quarter marijuana request spreadsheet and all the supporting documentation. Available for allocation is $494,457. And of course, we're divvied it up based on the percentages approved by council. 65% for city projects, and staff is here to present their projects should you have any questions. And then 4% for incentives, 1% for nonprofits, and then the remaining to rainy day fund. But city projects at 65% yielded $321,397. However, we subtracted out the allocation from 2021 for the south side fields fencing of 50,000. So we moved that back into available funding. And south side fencing will probably be proposed through the 2023 budget and the capital improvements fund.
Okay.
So does council have any questions? Staff is available.
Well, let's do this. Let's just take one at a time here. The ADO demolitions. Does council have any questions on the ADO? That's pretty set forward.
There's nothing allocated to
Nothing
ADO.
allocated. Okay, oh, that's right, yeah. But the City Hall Connex storage container of $8,500? The only question I have there is that, it's gonna be a Connex, depending where we put it. We do have if it's a Connex building, in order for us to be in compliance with our own ordinance, we're going to have to fix that up.
Yeah, exactly.
To make it look decent.
Yeah.
That would be the only thing that I could think of.
Mayor, that Connex ordinance that's in place is with respect to residential areas. And so it's proposed to be placed at the water utility facility on Great Creek Road, and it would be all the way at the back. So either way, it's not going to be visible, and our ordinance, it wouldn't be against our ordinance.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, let's go on to the fire department ballistic vest, body armor. Chief, you want to come forward and kind of give us a little information on that? That would be actually the two items that you had, the ballistic vests and the hoses.
Okay, so let's start with ballistic vests. Right now, society is changing, and we're seeing more violent calls. We haven't really seen them here yet, but I kind of want to be prepared for them and provide safety. Another thing we're going to be doing is working with Trinidad Police Department to develop that active shooter response plan. They kind of right by the wayside. So according to NFPA, we are supposed to supply our firefighters with gear if they're going in the hot zone or the warm zone. So that's what that funding is for. We're not asking for funding for every member of our department. We figure 6 will be enough, and it's kind of a one size fits most. And so they'll be able to share these vests and use them accordingly. And we'll have a whole written SOP on it, when they use them, when they don't use them, stuff like that.
And all the firefighters will be trained?
Right, yeah, and we're working with Officer Tanovich to kind of develop this program. So it's a work in progress, but we kind of need the equipment so we know how to train on it. And if you don't have any equipment, so you can train on it. And then as far as the hoses and the nozzles, we went through hose testing this year. We're testing hose from 1972.
That's fairly new.
Yeah, that's fairly new, right? Yeah. And a lot of it didn't pass. And a lot of this is a tack line, which we actually go into the structures with. We did some hose testing the other day on our last truck, and we lost 2 more sections or another 100 feet of a tack line. And then all of our nozzles are outdated. My goal, the nozzles that we have now, and Councilman Shu can kind of understand this a little bit, but the nozzles that we have now, we have to have 100 PSI at the tip of the nozzle to provide the correct GPM, okay? So that means our pumps are running about 160 PSI, which puts a lot of nozzle reaction on our folks, which wears them out. Well, when you only have 4 guys to 5 guys a day, and they're already under stress with their job, if we can relieve some of that stress off of them, that would be beneficial, and I can actually make them work a little longer, right? So this new nozzle and hose system that I want to go to, it's 50 PSI at the nozzle. So our pumps are running about 80, 90 PSI, and we're getting more GPM. We're actually getting 150 GPM at the tip.
So the recoil pressure on that?
Yeah, the nozzle reaction is very limited. So they can sit there and maneuver their lines a little better.
Oh, you're so sweet.
And I can work them a little longer.
Yeah, it does.
Which is a plus for us.
It does make sense,
Yeah.
the pressure on that.
And we're updating our hoses from 1972, so that's a big plus.
That's what we want those.
Yeah.
Any questions on
No.
the chief on this item?
That's good.
Now, each time that you come forward, you come with a reasonable request to
Yes.
update.
Yeah, I'm not gonna just spend taxpayer money, spend taxpayer
Appreciate
money,
it.
so,
Thank you very much.
Right.
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, next item is fleet maintenance tools equipment for $7,500. Who is, somebody from fleet?
Hello, some of you guys don't know me, but I'm Rico Guillen, I'm the fleet supervisor here for the city. So coming forward, I'm asking for $7,500 to, starting off with upgrading our toolboxes. The toolboxes have been there for a very long time, couldn't tell you when, but a lot of the doors don't work, they don't roll around, and it's hard to maneuver the tools in and out of that. So we're cutting down on efficiency. So by changing the toolboxes, to be more efficient, store more tools, stuff like that. Going to the next tool would be the hydraulic system volume and pressure tester. So this tool will actually allow us to be able to pressure test and diagnose hydraulic systems, which we do have plenty of assets in the city, machinery, different type of stationary objects that we could test and keep it more or less in-house to save money. Recently we had a sweeper that we had to send up north to get fixed, and it cost the city about $11,000, and some of that was due to hydraulic issue, which we were not able to diagnose because we didn't have the right equipment.
In that case, if you had been able to do it in-house, what that cost would have been?
Significantly less. Yeah, significantly less. Moving on to the plasma cutter, we do have one. Once again, this unit has been in the shop for a very long time. It does not work. We've tried to tinker with it to try to get it to work, but it just doesn't. So having that will allow us to be more efficient, faster, and keep the guys safe, because you're eliminating the dross and stuff like that from falling down on the floor and stuff like that. So it's a lot cleaner as well. And then moving on to the roll carts and topside creepers. So the roll carts, once again, now we're having to be able to carry the tools, from like one project to the next. So by having these roll carts, we're able to roll everything that we need, parts, tools, and everything. Save on the employees' bodies, really. You know what I mean? Make it more efficient. And then on the topside creepers, this will allow us to, once again, save on body wear and tear, and to avoid like touching hot surfaces when we're working over a vehicle that just come in. We've had instances before to where we've had burns and stuff like that from working on hot vehicles. So once again, it's kind of like a safety factor, and in reality, it kind of keep us, the safety and longevity will go a long way having these access to the fleet department.
Is that gonna be enough money to cover all that?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I
think, it's important that we spend money for that equipment and stuff.
Yes, sir. I actually tallied it up today. Right now it's at $7,485.36. So just right under $7,500.
It's not very much. That's good.
Okay, any questions, Mark? Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, IT, community center cabling, and Mimosa radio hardware. Mimosa sounds really
Yes, so the Mimosa Radio Hardware project, looking forward to rolling out fiber optic between all the city buildings. We still need some method of having a redundant circuit. So this Mimosa hardware is carrier grade wireless backbone hardware. So it'll be a redundant circuit once we get the fiber in place, but until we get the fiber, it'll be a primary circuit. So the goal there is we have 14 buildings in the city with 9 different locations, and we're paying not every location, but we have some kind of a internet service provider bill at most of those locations. So by putting in this backbone, whether it's fiber, wireless, or whatever, we'll be able to reduce the cost of some of that. And then, I'll show you a picture real quick. There we go.
Nice.
So that's our community center wiring. And apologies to people in the back who want to see it, please stick around. It does not look like that right now. That wall's blank and we're putting stuff in place. So with what council's given us in the past, we've been able to repair a lot of this. And so when I started in February of 2020, that's what the server room at the police department looked like. That was last year, after a little bit of fixing. And I'm gonna see if I can find the, oops. Let's see, where's it at? And ignore this little section here, we still have a little bit more to do. But that's what it looks like today. So. These little network switches, the network hardware that we placed the order for in February of last year finally arrived. And last Tuesday we started fixing up the cabling here. So we're going through slowly and repairing just many, many years of neglect. That was the water department. And if you ever get in here to try to work on anything, all this stuff right here would fall over, and I always snagged it with my arm. And this is with the cabinet open, but that's what the water department looks like now. So,
What about our dispatch center? Do you,
dispatch.
yes, how's that
I'm
coming?
gonna say,
Because we have two,
usually I don't do much with dispatch.
you don't do any of that for either of the two sections? Who does all that?
So that's outsourced. I believe Hayden Allworth has the contract right now.
Okay.
You just-
No, I was just kind of curious if you did any of that for,
No.
no.
And dispatch is kind of its own little creature where they've got a contract with Motorola, and there's a company out of La Habana that does, so there's like 3 or 4 different vendors that actually work with that. So the stuff I've been pushing for, the wireless equipment, the network hardware, that's to clean all of this up and make a more reliable system. So the 6,000 I'm asking for now is to finish fixing up the community center.
Okay, any questions? The only question I have, James, is, when we get broadband, will any of this need to be updated, or will
No.
this be able to?
Okay, so the switches that we originally ordered in February of last year, or February of this year rather, to this date, there's still no expected ship date on the switches I originally asked for. So I went back to our CDW sales rep and our Fortinet network engineer, and we redesigned what we originally designed to utilize switches that were in stock. So even when we get the fiber in place, these switches will still work fine with that fiber. These are last year's model, so they're a little bit slower. But because we started experiencing failures, I had 2 switches at the police department fail this year. And we have a switch, well, Rico's not here. The switch for fleet maintenance and the switch for community center. We had multiple areas that started failing. So it was more of an incentive to get whatever we could at this point. So the switches will work fine, they're just a little bit not as fast.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, on to the PD cell phone reader. Anybody here from the PD? That was an interesting concept.
So this is, this project has been something that we've had trying to get to be able to acquire, so we do not have to outsource or send forensic, or evidence for forensic testing to like the Bureau of Investigation or another agency. Something we can do in-house. And it's basically to lessen the turnaround time. A lot of times when you send stuff to these bigger agencies and CBI and stuff like that, we're not important to them. So our investigations turnaround time usually tend to be months instead of where it could be days or weeks maybe. So we had, I'll give an example. We sent some stuff, and this could, I think this also works for some other digital devices that store memory and stuff like that. It doesn't just have to be a cell phone. We sent some stuff in regards to a pornography investigation to CBI, and it took them quite a long time for us to get any of that stuff back. And it just prolonged the case to the point where it made us kind of look bad because people wanted answers, you know, and we tried to be as transparent as we could to say, listen, we had to send it out to somewhere else, and so it just took a little bit of time for us.
So this will allow you to process some of this stuff to actually work with the court systems as well?
Yes, yeah, so I mean, we can get the evidence downloaded and properly discovered to the court system in a timely manner. Usually we have 21 days to get stuff turned over to discovery from the time of an arrest or official complaint being made, and a lot of times things like this of the digital forensic world on top of some other forensic testing stuff that gets hindered up by the big influx of cases at CBI and these other agencies that just, these smaller agencies weren't not important to them, but they have more high profile things going on.
So it sounds to me like, being that when you send these out, have had to send these out, it could actually hamper an investigation for discovery time for the DA?
It could, yes, and possibility of getting cases dismissed or
Right.
Thrown out because it doesn't look like we had our ducks in a row. You know, because we didn't have our evidence presented possibly. Just to run over, I think you guys have a quote from Data Pilot for $61.75. Some of that stuff, and I'm not completely 100%, Detective Sergeant Lay has been helping me with this. And she had to go help with an investigation this evening, but some of this stuff is a one-time fee where you're actually buying equipment. The other stuff, like the license agreements and stuff, we'll have to re-up if we use them, but you get a package deal. I think it said 10 downloads, or there's a number on there basically, and then obviously a yearly subscription, which I can talk to Detective Sergeant Lay a little bit more about that to see what the yearly price cost.
I think it would be good for us to know
Yeah.
what that
Yeah.
what the subscription charges will be.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Okay. Questions for him?
No. How long would it take you if you got this equipment?
I'm not 100% positive. I know I was talking to the sales rep, and then we kind of put it on the back burner until we found out that the funds came available late here recently, where they said, hey, if you guys have anything else, please let us know. So we told him it probably wasn't going to be till next year, but I can recontact him, get some information, and send it out to you all.
I was just curious.
Yeah, within a couple of weeks maybe. I'm not positive.
I think it's an excellent item to have at your disposal. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is horticulture department.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
I apologize for the typo. I don't know how that happened. 110. I was dreaming. Added 17,000 for flowers and trailheads and playgrounds. Anyway, it's just 43, not the greenhouse.
Okay.
Unless, you know.
Are you doing a greenhouse?
So he's talking about buying a greenhouse at some point, is that what you're looking for?
Well, hopefully, but I mean, that's what the tables are for. We had the baskets on the ground last year at King's Lumber, and that was pretty tricky. You know, weeds and insects, lots of insects last year, this past summer. So in lieu, I would be happy to find a little hoop house for $5,000 and not do tables. It would be nice, so. but I'll work with whatever you give me.
Well, any questions? Is
No,
that-
I mean,
Would-
just a comment more than anything. I think the benefit of those flowers downtown are immeasurable. People comment about them all the time.
There are a lot of comments, good comments.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
No, no, good job.
Gentlemen?
No question.
Thank
Do a
you.
good job.
Okay. Yeah, just one question. You're looking for possibly a greenhouse and down the road? Is that what you're actually, your
Yeah,
long-term vision is?
Right, not to grow, it's for
Keep
storage.
Right.
So when I have, 1,000 petunias on the ground and it's April, it'd be nice to put them inside, when we have multiple freezings in
Right.
May.
If you were able to acquire one, of course not this round, but at some point, where would you place that? Do you have any idea?
That's part of the issue is it needs would need electricity and water.
Is there an area there by Central Park where you have the trucks parked? That's kind of a big area there, it has power.
I'd actually rather not be there at all because we take up parking and at Central, you mean, in the parking lot?
What is the ideal location that you're thinking?
Behind the power plant, water,
Yeah, water, electric, whatever, yeah.
I'm wherever.
I would think that it would be someplace where it's not really visible so much to the public. Because if you put it like
Yeah,
a
or
Central
even
Park,
behind gas or,
Yeah.
I don't know,
someplace that's more protected.
protected and not visible.
Can't remember, how big was that building? How big was the building that you were thinking of buying?
For
yeah.
greenhouse, approximately 25 by 40 or 50. So
Okay, all right.
gravel floor, fans, a door, double air.
All right, thank you. Okay, I guess we have Trinidad hiking and walking guide. That'll be Mr. Jared.
Are you late for a meeting, sir?
I canceled the meeting.
Okay.
I used to be here, but I could be late I'm playing the Ghost of Christmas Present in Raton in the Schuler Theater, and our first dress rehearsal is in an hour. But Mayor and Council, always a pleasure. Hiking, walking guide. There was a slight confusion with the tourism board as to some of the funding that we thought we had, and so we didn't have the $5,000 that we thought we did, and so this request is to make up for that, and so we will then have the total that we need. That project, actually, I have a meeting with the contractor tomorrow, and is coming along very, very well, and very excited to have it to roll out for early spring of next year and promote our hiking and walking assets. So, unless there's any other questions.
Questions, Mark?
Will there be anything on the website to tie in for the?
Yes, absolutely. We will do all sorts of cross combination to cross promote through the website, through whatever different. The guide itself has a number of QR codes that'll connect with other different assets, the auto tour and also the downtown architecture guide that was put together will also all be incorporated in that hiking walking guide.
Cool. Nim, anything? And I can see the reason why you're asking the funding from this marijuana funding for this project, because I know with tourism, it's a little bit different marketing strategy that they have, which is outside 50 miles. So I can understand the reason why. So it does make sense. Okay. All righty. Thank you. Okay, the big one. Trinidad pickleball courts. You're not done.
So there were some, the Park and Rec Advisory Board collected some letters from folks just so I provide interest from the community about pickleball, so I just like to share that with you. But
These are all different.
all different letters. Probably the most interesting one is the last page. People have been keeping track of the number of people from Trinidad, residents who are going to play in Raton, so that's what those numbers are there. on a daily basis, just as a record of how many people are leaving here to go over there to play.
And these courts are at the high school? Is that
So we have already gone through the memorandum of understanding or a use agreement with the high school to use the lower courts, the tennis courts there that are by the gym. That's already been signed off by all entities, and so that's already been taken care of. I have got some quotes on different options as far as construction or refurbishing. The best, or the cheapest is obviously to refurbish the court. The company who provided the quote is Sports Courts of the Southwest. We've already worked with them. They built our tennis courts. So they're already in our system and we're familiar with what they've done. They provided the quote. It came in at $165,000. They said it was a very rough quote, not having, just going off of the pictures I sent them, but that they said they could probably do it within that. So the request is for 180, just so we have a little bit of lee room, then not, having been on site and see what it is. Some folks inquired, do we actually need to have 6 courts? And the purpose for the number of courts, and this is actually something that's come out of the economic and impact, outdoor recreation economic impact study that's being done by DOLA, is to provide or to establish more recreation facilities that attract people in the sense of tournaments and stuff, so there's that economic development aspect, not just as a community amenity. And we actually had several people from Springs, from Pueblo, and probably the most interesting one was the fellow from Texas who came to the Welcome Center to inquire about our pickleball courts, and we told him we didn't have any, and he said it was a shame because he was looking for a place to hold tournaments because in Texas it's too hot. And he wanted a cooler venue, and so I told him, give us a little bit of time, we're working on it, but so.
Keep his name and number.
I got his name and number.
Do you anticipate, if this approved, that it'll be ready to go this next summer, or?
So in my conversations with the contractor, if we get it approved, that we should be able to be hopefully end of spring, first of summer, so we'd have them this following year.
Same resurfacing compound, Jared?
Yeah, they have
Or is it different for pickleball? For us older guys?
Actually, what they have is it's a tile system, and actually, from what people have said, it's a little easier on our older generation joints. Yeah. So that's what they recommend, to just kind of be an overlay over our existing. They wouldn't have to deal with the cracks that are already there on the court. It's kind of just an overlay. That's what.
Just out of curiosity, because the high school is in a different organization, school district 1, who takes responsibility for insurance?
Both. That's the lessor and the lessee.
Both?
And who's going to do the maintenance on them?
So according to the contract that we signed, we would maintain them in perpetuity for as long as we have the contract. According to the contractor, they said there'd be an annual, well, not an annual maintenance cost. Every about 5 years, there'd be about a $5,000 maintenance cost to kind of just keep everything up to par, I guess, as you would say.
Because those courts we've had issues with those courts before, a long time ago, because they keep cracking.
Yeah.
And, if it's not settled, that's kind of a lot of money to put if we're end up.
Absolutely. So that's what the advantage of this is.
Hey, Andre, you're unmuted.
The court surface is because it's a rubberized overlay and not the actual concrete or the quartz. The cracking should be at a minimum because it's not the actual on the ground and expansion. It's just that overlay that kind of just sits on top of it, and so the underneath can continue to crack as it is now, but it shouldn't affect the surface of what we put on.
It's kind of like a rhino-liner.
Yeah, something like that.
And you say we don't have any pickle courts now? We have any at the golf course?
There's one strike at the golf course, and there's one at Los Niños on there, but they're not permanent. People have to bring in the nets and everything like this. To have established courts is what we were trying to go for, particularly there by Central Park, where we have this kind of sport complex kind of being developed with the with everything that's going on there at Central, this would be a great addition. And it would be utilized by the public, by the schools, and then for any I said corporation, but group who wants to host tournaments, it would then be a host site for tournaments.
Oh, the agreement that you have with the school for usage, is it 2 years, 5 years, 15 years? What's the?
As far as I know, I wish Audra could chime in on it. I didn't see a time cap on that agreement. I'm sure there probably is one, but I'm not aware of
I think it'd be something that probably we should have. That, to your answer about the insurance portion of that, I think it'd be good to have those questions answered.
Sure, absolutely.
There's 2 full tennis courts up there, right?
Right, there's the top one
Right.
that's being used for it's like some sort of horticulture project, or they've done something like that.
So
And
this is just the lower.
Just the lower ones.
Okay. Any other questions for her? Okay. Who's doing the Southside Fields fencing? Any?
No.
I think that was just
That's a refund.
the refund, basically?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, boards and commissions, arts and culture for 22. Anybody here from boards and arts and culture?
I work with them on their budget and installation, so if you have a question, I can answer
Well,
it.
they had
Try to.
Yeah, there are quite a few things on there that they wanted to fund. Some actual art items and just looking at it, like I said, there's maybe
Oh,
hard.
here it is. $10,000 for kinetic mobiles, sculpture, posters, public art tour brochure, youth and arts piece. Just a lot of small ones, and then 2,000 for base and installation of OXO sculpture.
And then a new wildlife one, I think.
River wildlife art.
Yeah, the kinetic one is for Space to Create.
Okay. Do you have enough information on that, you think, on that particular item?
I'd like to have a little bit more information on that. I see where the OXO sculpture is behind the Space to Create right now.
They moved that over, they didn't spend that money this past year, so they moved it over. But I've talked to Wally about having that just installed back there as part of that patio, so I don't think a base would cost that much.
Okay.
I think part of that was the concrete and maybe putting it on Capitol Hill at the Triangle, and that's a complicated spot, so.
They're not gonna do that there.
No.
That's what I thought. they
Yeah, I
would put it there.
encourage them to put it somewhere more
Yeah.
protected and
Yes.
not on a hill.
So, do you?
Maybe they can give us some clarification on that.
Probably a good idea for them to maybe do a presentation next week at a regular meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll send them an email.
Okay, please do. Thank you.
Thanks.
Historic Preservation Commission.
Good evening.
Good
Good evening.
evening, council and staff. Basically, Historic Preservation is a fledgling group. We are trying to maintain our CLG status, which is Certified Local Government status. And in order to do that, we have some training requirements because we do have some new commission members that will need some training. So a small portion of this request is for that. And then the remaining request is for landmarking buildings, which is our primary purpose. And in the coming month, you'll probably see landmarking for City Hall, which is on last year's budget. And then we also have outlined city-owned buildings that are in need of landmarking. And we're just waiting for completion, like Fox Theater. We're looking for that completion so we can go forward with the landmarking. And each of these landmarkings, it has to be done by somebody that's certified in historic preservation. So the cost for each report is $2,000 each.
Questions from Ms. Holmes?
You said 2,000 for each report,
Yes.
and how many reports?
Well, right now we have scheduled for city-owned buildings, we have 5, and then we have 5 for public use.
That's 20. Yeah.
So that's 10,000 each.
Yeah, right.
And we don't know if, you know, what the public's gonna bring, so we just keep that open. But we do know our schedule, you know, if the public doesn't bring us any landmarking, historic preservation will work on city-owned buildings. Because we have quite a few of them that are in need of landmarking.
You mentioned that you're trying to keep the CLG status. Is it the reason that if we don't get these people trained that we could lose that CLG status? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there's certain requirements that we need to meet, and training is one of them. And the state of Colorado expects us to outreach and perform public outreach to the community. So there is also a expense of $6,500 for public outreach, and we'll have that event in June 3rd of this next year.
So the biggest issue on this sounds like is the training portion, to get that done.
And public outreach.
Okay. How many of your members have to get trained?
Well, we have 5 members on commission, and 3 of them are new. And I kind of consider myself new too, but I won't require full training as they do.
And what do they have to go to training up in Denver, or?
Yeah, I think this year's convention is in Boulder, and then La Junta will probably all attend La Junta because it's so close.
Is that a one-day event, two-day event?
It's a 2-day event.
Okay. Any other questions?
On the city buildings, how much repaired are you looking?
I wish I knew that. I'm not intrinsically involved in the repairs. I'm just anticipating their completion.
Yeah.
And it's just better for us to be landmarking, say, the West Theater when it's fully complete and everybody can go through it and enjoy it.
So if we're waiting for the Fox West to be completed, why are we allocating money for it now?
For the coming year, I was anticipating it would be complete, but it's not.
I don't think so.
I also have the golf course clubhouse on here, and I'm not sure what this, you know, we had that up on top of our list, and we're not sure exactly what's going on with the clubhouse, so we try to keep it. So if there's like some city-owned buildings that we need to put off till next year, we can do that.
Can we possibly get a list for those buildings at some point, just to see what is in step with
What's
yeah.
finalized.
Right, okay.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Under the Parks and Rec Board.
Hi, Jay.
Good evening, everybody.
Hi, Jen.
Hi, Jay.
How are you? So, judging from this, the request that made it through is $3,400. And our original request was for more than that, and I did some math, and I think I figured out what you did.
Okay.
Because as is often the case with Parks and Rec, it's hard to tell whether it's a capital improvement thing or a project type thing. You know, like what, we know that Parks and Rec are important, but what funding stream is applied to it?
I should have sent this to you, I apologize.
Okay.
That's how we divvied it up.
Okay, so you found some other sources?
Yes.
Okay. So all of these things are still
They're
within the...
well, if the only one that we need approved is marijuana allocation tonight.
Okay. There are 4 things in our proposal. One is some pedestrian trail improvement at the community center, and I've been talking with Marty, he attends our board meetings, just to make that a more accessible facility, especially for youth, people who are trying to walk there. And then that's in line with some other funding that apparently he's getting together to do some improvements on just the area to the north and east of the center, where there's just a lot of overgrowth and brush. You know. Anyway, so it's kind of part of a general intention to clean up that area and make it more accessible. The second piece is ADA wheelchair platform swing for Central Park, which has been brought up apparently in the past, and so we're just bringing that back here. $2,200 to get that installed at Central Park. The third item is wormhole trailhead upgrades, just to continue to support some upgrades there in terms of trail signage, putting in some actual parking stops, some weed mitigation, and ADA picnic tables. So a small ask there of $6,000, just to continue to beef that up, because we do get a lot of visitation to that site. I see it's in our new website, it's kind of featured. So we continue to take care of that. Trinidad Trails Alliance continues to offer volunteer time for maintenance, so we do have, that piece covered. It's always a big issue with, opening a can of worms like building trails. And then the last piece is $1,200 for youth golf club sets for the Trinidad Golf Course, trying to bring some much needed infusion of young blood and enthusiasm into our recs, outdoor rec environment. I've talked with Trinidad Youth Club about creating summer programming, so this would just provide the equipment for that.
Questions for him?
No, you're right. I talked to Patrick Walsh today. I interviewed him, and that's what he mentioned.
Did he? Great.
So I have your sheet here, your budget. So you've got notes on here. So that first 10,000 is a capital improvement, and the wormhole trail, you're getting lottery funds, and so you're just asking for the 3,400
from
the marijuana. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I got that right. I think the golf clubs might be a good idea, but I don't know if that's something that the city wants to provide.
For the TGA?
Yeah, I mean, they don't have golf clubs up there just for the public to use now, do they?
No, I don't think so.
Do they have a golf pro or something like that that can?
No, they don't have a golf pro.
Not anymore.
They don't have rent clubs either.
No.
But they don't have any youth clubs either, so it's kind of a twofold deal.
Yeah, I mean, there's a room in the back that has a bunch of...
But it probably wouldn't be a bad idea. What are you looking at? How many sets of clubs?
6 at 200 apiece.
Yeah.
That's really pretty cheap.
200 for a set?
That's a high
6.
estimate. It's
6.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
We're supposed to get some on the golf course coming up eventually, aren't we?
Yes, sir.
An RFB or whatever. And maybe we can include that in that. Any other, let me go ahead.
I'm not worried about the $1,200. I'm concerned about starting a process or procedure.
a precedent.
A precedent, yes. That's
Yeah.
what my concern is.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know any insurance, if that's our clubs, none of the kids get hurt with our clubs.
The way that I've thought about that, is maybe this was something that would be housed at the rec center. I mean, like it actually belongs to equipment that is if not housed, belongs to the rec center. Similar to the pickleball nets right now. You gotta go to the rec center to get them, to take them to one of the pickleball courts to play. So, you know, in terms of the
I just
longevity
have
of the.
I have a legal issue with them more than the financial. What do you see?
With having sets of golf clubs for kids to use on the golf
Yes.
course, I might be missing something here, but I don't see.
Because you would be renting them from the golf course itself, so the golf course would have the responsibility.
And I would think, I mean, we're already on the hook in terms of the golf course and kind of,
Yeah.
you know, right, how we insure that, and I don't think it would really increase our liability if we had like a, you know, golf club program where you could get them either from the community center or what have you. I don't think it would be a problem from a legal liability standpoint. I just don't think it would be, like if somebody got injured on the golf course, we have coverage, and I don't think that our exposure would be heightened or increased by an injury being caused by a person using a set of city golf
It's
clubs.
no, you know, I just want to be clear on it. So is this going to be just for the purpose of the youth club using them? Or if any child goes up there, they can use those clubs?
The intention is for anybody, but the guarantee is that they will be used, you know, by, you know, at least preliminarily by the youth club. I
Okay.
also envision, you know, grandparents wanting to take their grandkids out and there's actually
Right.
something they can do with them. Because you do see kids out there, and I hate it to be just for the privileged few that have their own clubs.
Yeah.
And are we doing some ADA work at the community center? Would that not include what the issue there? Wasn't that one of our projects?
The trail that,
No, not the trails. What you have on the?
Oh, the swing, the ADA wheelchair
Right.
swing?
Aren't we doing some work up there?
we're doing some infrastructure improvements up there.
So would that be included in it?
No, this would be, this isn't an amenity that would be separate from our efforts.
At Central Park, it's basically a platform that you can put a wheelchair on.
Well, yeah, I was just
Yeah.
kind of curious, since we were doing work up there, I thought maybe we could include that in it, and that way you wouldn't have to do it through the parks.
Right.
You know, I think the golf clubs are a decent idea because one of the complaints that we get from parents and other people is that there's not anything for, you know, younger people to do. And this gives them an option to be able to play golf if they want to learn how, you know, and my recommendation was hopefully maybe you can find somebody, or they could find somebody that would, one of these golfers that's really good at it, to, you know, teach these kids how to play golf.
Right.
There's also First Tee and a lot of programs out there that I've done before with kids that are, you know, a really thought out program to bring kids into golf, that where they don't actually go straight to a set of clubs right off the bat. But I don't know, I personally think it's worth it, because you know, just seeing, again, the older population bringing little kids out there and having something to do with their grandkids.
I think it's a great idea as far as finding golf clubs for youth, and then you can cross promote it with the college, as well as just with the new website and tying it to Parks, Rec, travel, tourism, just to say we have other options in addition to the swimming pool and everything else we got going on for kids and baseball and soccer.
Yeah, I think Marty was there at our meeting when we got this all together, and he feels like he has a hand in managing it, but he feels like it's a good idea.
You know, the other thing is that I'm glad that you're planning on trying to do something with that, updating that the wormhole on them, because it needs work.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, little by little.
Any other questions?
No.
Good, thank you, Jen.
All right.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Good. So I guess the big thing is that getting the, somebody from the arts and culture in front of us next week.
Yep.
Ms. Deverett, there was that 1797 that's still remaining. What do you anticipate that will look like?
Nobody's come forward with requests. I don't know.
Okay, so if nobody comes forward, then we put it
Christmas
Christmas party.
Christmas, no. You know, on our next marijuana deal, I wasn't too sure if we were gonna do it this time or not, but didn't we have we were supposed to get a lawnmower for the golf course that was 98,000, or how were we gonna work that one out?
We actually put that in the capital budget.
Oh, so we don't have to worry about it, okay. Yeah, I was just kinda curious, because I remember we had thought about putting it there.
Right. Yes, it's in next year's capital improvements fund.
May I make a suggestion? I don't know if this is possible, but just because that remaining amount is so low, the gentleman from the mechanics department, he's kind of thin.
Borderline.
That's getting low.
He's thin.
Okay, I can move it there.
Yeah.
Yeah, for safety and stuff.
Yeah. Because do they charge sales tax for, no?
No, but you get a quote now and you go to order it next week.
Shipping
It's
charges
increased.
even.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right,
That was a good idea.
Yeah.
Good idea.
okay,
Okay,
good deal.
all right, and the rest is okay, the incentives, nonprofits, and rainy day fund, I think that's all set. Okay. I guess we'll move forward with those changes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go back to item 3, which is the committed funds discussion.
Remember, just bringing up a presentation real quick, and
Okay.
we'll be good to go.
Unless we have one. Are we just
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, then we
I really do appreciate that.
Thank you, though.
Everybody come forward and explain to us.
Once I start,
What they want to do with the
Yeah.
fund.
Once
As
I
you're
get it.
requesting. I think that's really a good idea.
Yeah, too.
That we have them come in front of us.
Oh, yeah.
and, explain to us what they're going to apply for. I know,
Yeah.
Karen brought that up several months ago. That was a good idea.
Good idea there.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Anybody else needs artificial?
It's good stuff.
Sweet
It's good
nipples,
antioxidants.
some of the sweet nipples, now have to.
That's right, yeah. wake
There's
up.
not enough sugar in that.
I'm good.
You need lots of, everybody have some.
All my
That's
patients.
Yeah, right.
Stuff inside.
Yeah, carnage.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Can't lose that fat stuff.
There you go. There you go. You got it.
I do.
Alrighty.
What do we have?
Yeah, the fun just keeps on coming.
That's right. Yeah, thank you, Alan.
I think you should send your whole presentation.
Like Alice.
Late December, right, 1963.
Exactly, very good.
Oh, what a night.
Yeah, right. Wow, the youthful people.
I love that song.
Wow. You're still a youngster, how do you know that?
I was born in the wrong.
All right, yeah.
So my son
For
says.
sure.
Yeah.
Alrighty, tonight we're gonna talk about committing and decommitting and that type of thing of our healthy general fund balance or reserve. The last commitment we had was in March of 2022. I'd like to get this taken care of this fiscal year, because if we have it approved by the end of December, the auditor can include it in the audit, and he ties up the funds as being committed, and that way it takes it out of the unassigned fund balance, and there's not so much unassigned fund balance that the citizens don't think that we're not tapping into. I don't know if that makes sense, but we want to get our funds committed. That way it looks like we are, well, it doesn't look like. That way the citizens know that we have planned projects on the horizon. So, first we're just gonna take a look at the highlighted portion at the bottom. Council originally committed 2.6 million and 3 million for those two projects, the West Main Street 3 blocks and then First Chestnut and Maple Streets. And those monies, obviously, we're getting ready to put that into a project. And we're gonna move those monies out of committed and transfer them into capital to get the project going for the First Street project. So technically, we're decommitting those funds because we're moving them into capital. The next item, highlighted item, is the broadband services for the community. And we did receive the $1,030,000. We're going to commit that funding for the ARPA funding. And that's the newest item on the list. So after we take away and add and subtract, we are trying to direct $8.3 million, or commit $8.3 million. Now, what council needs to do is take a look at the items that have been committed and let me know, are we still good with these being committed? Are there new projects we're looking at or taking away?
And those items are the ones in the directed amount?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So we have 809,000 to exit 14. The 1,002,500 for.
So is it a good thing that we uncommit some of these funds?
Decommit. We should decommit, but still keep funds committed at 8.3 million, so we needed to redirect it.
Because from prior or past discussions we've had on covering the swimming pool, we're committed to 1.25, right? Okay, so from what I've understood from Mr. Chatterley and Mr. Velasquez is that the existing swimming pool cannot be covered. It's not the right structure. So would it be, I mean, it's been a mandate by the citizens that they want a year-round swimming pool. So do we decommit that money and give it to other projects in anticipation of maybe 4 or 5 years down the road, we start talking about a covered swimming pool? Is it, as far as a priority, in my mind, it's not that big of a priority other than the maintenance issue of streets?
I think the other thing too, Karen, is that 1.25, wasn't that funding, weren't we going to move that over to the Central Park?
Yeah.
Upgrade?
Facilities.
That's right, that's what I thought we were going to do, that was to move that up.
You see, I missed that.
And
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate you bringing this up, Councilwoman Griego. This is one of the ones I was going to highlight tonight. You're 100% correct. The feasibility of covering the existing swimming pool is just not there. So we would rather, if we're going to commit any funds, it would be towards a future project to do a full aquatic center, maybe even have some recreation components, a gym with that. But one thing I did want to highlight is the new hotel will have indoor swimming, and they will be offering memberships to the public. So there will be an option at least, even though it's not a municipal facility. So you are beating me to the punch. We wanted to talk, no, you're great. We wanted to talk to you about this, and Central Park has been a discussion, streets have been a discussion too. We could put some money in there to do some more road rehabilitation. So we wanted some direction from you all as to where to put that money at this point.
I personally feel that, we've been talking about Central Park, and that's used quite a bit.
Yeah.
My preference is to
Great.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We can move that over, work on the grandstands, our ADA issues out there. There's so much that can be done. So I think that would be terrific.
Any other items?
What about the 5 Points, Colorado, and commercial? Isn't that going to be included in the other project if we decide to do the Welcome Center over in that area?
That's at 809.
And that's a good question. I believe the 809, Cheryl, is that for land acquisition?
We don't, whatever it needs to be for in that
So I think
area.
that's really the intent.
Initially, I think that's for land acquisition of the properties that have moved
Exactly,
And then
yeah.
we also have another amount of land acquisition, economic development land acquisition of $941,000. So that's available for both.
And we're talking about an additional land acquisition that we're still working on.
Yeah.
It won't cost that much, but
Yeah.
it's available.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing too is, if this Hughes building gets sold, then that'll move that funding into land acquisition as well.
Yep.
correct?
Yes. Yes.
And that Eagle Rock, that pretty much, does that pretty much have to stay there? Because doesn't that have a specific?
That might be a question for Audra, because I'm not familiar with Eagle Rock.
Yeah, and I talked to Audra about this. So this is for some planned development that we have up in that area. And this would be the city's portion of some of the infrastructure improvements that will be required.
Yeah, we've talked about, I know in the past, a couple of years ago, about the sewer
Yeah.
date and stuff like that. So
Yep.
we probably ought to leave that there in the event that
Yeah.
it does materialize.
Exactly, yeah.
The uncompensated absences, I thought we were up to,
Bringing that down.
well, I thought we were up to snuff on that.
Actually, I believe the balance is now about 950,000,
Really?
but,
Now we still got to put
And we've been
forward?
chipping away at that.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah.
well, this is to cover that 950.
Oh, okay.
That's why we're locking it down.
Okay,
It-
okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's
So-
covered.
So
The
will
liability is covered.
So will this be gone forever now?
Well, as people retire, we can take, like I said, now I think the balance is around 950,000. So as I retire, we can reduce this. Technically, I could move 50,000 out, but it's still,
Yeah.
it's in the ballpark.
And then that West Main, that's that portion that we've been talking about for some time,
Mm.
updating that.
Well,
Coming off of
Removing
Santa Fe
that.
Trail, is that the area?
Yeah,
No.
that's one.
which one are we talking about?
That would be the
working.
West Main 3 blocks?
West Main.
So actually, that was decommitted
Oh, that's right,
and moved
yes,
into the First Street project.
Yes, that's right, okay,
Yes.
that's right.
Okay.
That pretty much covers everything.
Yep.
Okay.
Right, so I will change, we'll decommit the swimming pool and we're gonna add Central Park facilities. Any description, is that broad enough? Please,
Yeah, I think
just
that's
Central Park
probably pretty good.
facilities? Okay, so I'll have this in resolution form for the next meeting and we'll get it in the audit.
Okay,
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
okay, that go ahead and winds up our work session. Let's go ahead and take a break. We'll come back to our regular.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank God.
You're done. You're just going to come back and vote to go into executive session.
Yeah, this is.